Most people believe that if you want to improve your brain, your focus, memory, or mental clarity, you need long, intense sessions. More time, more effort, more complexity. That assumption feels logical. If something matters, you invest deeply into it, but when you look at how the brain actually adapts, that logic starts to break down, because the brain doesn't respond best to intensity. It responds best to consistency, and that creates a surprising question. Why do shorter routines often seem to work better than longer ones when it comes to brain training? At first, it doesn't make sense. A 10 or 15-minute session feels too small to create meaningful change. It feels almost insignificant compared to an hour of focused effort. But the brain doesn't measure effort the way we do. It measures patterns. Every time you engage in a task, whether it's focusing, learning, or even relaxing, you're not just completing that activity. You're reinforcing a state. And the brain starts to recognize that state as something familiar, something repeatable. The problem with long sessions is not that they're ineffective. It's that they're harder to repeat, and repetition is where adaptation actually happens. Think about what usually happens during a long brain training session. In the beginning, attention is strong. There's motivation, clarity, maybe even curiosity. But as time passes, fatigue starts to build. Focus becomes less stable. The quality of attention drops, even if the effort continues. So while the session is longer, the effective portion of it, the part where the brain is fully engaged, may be much shorter than expected. Short routines work differently. They operate within a window where attention is still stable. Instead of pushing beyond that window, they end before significant cognitive fatigue sets in. That means the brain repeatedly experiences a clean, high-quality version of the state you're trying to reinforce, not a stretched version of it. And that distinction matters more than it seems, because the brain doesn't just learn from duration. It learns from clarity of signal. If a session starts focused and ends scattered, the brain is exposed to both patterns. But if a session stays within a consistent range, clear, stable, repeatable, that pattern becomes easier to recognize and reproduce over time. This also explains why people often feel more resistant to long routines. It's not just about time. It's about cognitive load. Long sessions require sustained control over attention, which is one of the most resource-intensive things the brain does. When that demand becomes too high, the brain doesn't just get tired, it starts looking for ways to disengage. Distraction increases. Motivation drops. The experience becomes something to push through rather than something to repeat. Short routines reduce that friction. They lower the barrier to starting, and just as importantly, they lower the resistance to continuing the habit over days and weeks. And from a neurological perspective, that continuity is far more important than any single session. But there's another layer that often goes unnoticed. The brain doesn't just adapt during the activity itself. It also adapts between sessions. Spacing matters. When you engage in shorter, repeated sessions, you create intervals where the brain can process and stabilize what it just experienced. This is sometimes referred to as consolidation. It's not something you feel happening, but it plays a critical role in how patterns become more automatic over time. Long sessions reduce those intervals. They compress effort into a single block, which can feel productive, but may limit how often the brain cycles through engagement and consolidation. So instead of one long exposure, shorter routines create multiple cycles of activation and integration. And that changes how learning and adaptation accumulate. At this point, it becomes tempting to conclude that shorter is always better. But that would be an oversimplification. The real issue isn't length. It's alignment. A short routine works well when it matches the brain's natural attention span and can be repeated consistently. A long routine can also work, but only if it maintains quality of attention throughout, which is much harder to sustain. This is where most people misinterpret the idea of brain training. They assume improvement comes from pushing limits, but in many cases, it comes from staying within a range that can be repeated without resistance, and that leads to a key turning point. The real issue isn't that shorter routines are more powerful. It's that they are easier to repeat without degrading the quality of attention. Once you understand that, the effectiveness of short routines becomes less surprising. They fit the way the brain actually changes, gradually, through repeated exposure to consistent patterns. This also reframes the idea of progress. Instead of asking, "Did I do enough today?" the more useful question becomes, "Can I repeat this tomorrow with the same level of clarity?" Because that is what builds momentum at a neurological level, not intensity, not duration, but stability across time. And when that stability is in place, even small sessions begin to accumulate in a way that feels disproportionate to the effort involved. That's not because the sessions are doing more than expected. It's because they're being repeated under the right conditions. A structured breakdown of how repetition, attention, and cognitive load interact can help clarify when shorter routines are more effective and how to apply them without relying on motivation alone. If this perspective helped you rethink how brain training actually works, subscribing can help you explore more explanations about how small, consistent inputs shape long-term cognitive performance.